The official story is straightforward. Fire insurance maps and city directories served different purposes in the 19th century. Insurance companies needed to assess risk. City directories needed to catalog residents and businesses. The maps documented physical structures. The directories documented social and commercial activity. Two systems, two goals, reasonable divergence. But the numbers tell a different story. In 1876, the Sanborn Fire Insurance Company mapped 326 institutional buildings across Philadelphia's waterfront district. The city directory from that same year lists addresses for 89 of them. In Boston's South End, 1884 insurance maps show 412 large-scale structures with standardized architectural features. The directory accounts for 127. In Cincinnati, the gap widens further. Insurance surveyors documented 567 buildings across the Basin District in 1889. City officials recorded 201. These aren't small discrepancies. These are majority omissions. And they follow the same pattern across multiple cities, multiple decades, multiple record-keeping systems that supposedly operated independently. The structures that appear only on insurance maps share characteristics. Multi-story construction, uniform window spacing, standardized roof pitch, built from brick or stone, not wood, designed to last, designed to serve populations far larger than the directories suggest existed. This is a documentary exploring observable patterns in historical records. It does not make claims about what these patterns mean. It presents evidence, asks questions, and leaves interpretation open. What follows is based on archival materials, insurance surveys, and municipal documents available in public collections. The Sanborn Fire Insurance Company began systematic urban mapping in 1867. Their surveyors worked city by city, street by street, building by building. They measured footprints. They noted construction materials. They documented water access, building height, roof type, wall thickness. Every detail that might affect fire risk they recorded. The maps are extraordinarily precise. City directories served a different function. Published annually or biannually, they listed residents, businesses, and institutions by name and address. Directories included occupations, business categories, and sometimes building owners. They were commercial products sold to residents and businesses. They cataloged the social and economic life of a city. Both systems generated permanent records. Both claimed completeness. And yet, when placed side by side, they tell incompatible stories about the same urban spaces. Take the Buffalo waterfront, 1880. The Sanborn map shows a continuous line of warehouse structures along the canal basin. 37 buildings in total. Each one large enough to hold commercial goods for regional distribution. Each one built with fire-resistant materials. The city directory from that year lists 9 warehousing operations in the same zone. 9 businesses. 37 buildings. The math doesn't resolve. If the buildings existed and the insurance company surveyed them, why didn't the directories include them? If they were empty, why were they insured? If they weren't in use, why build them with such permanence? The pattern appears in Detroit, 1872. Insurance maps document 63 institutional buildings clustered near the railroad depot. These aren't small structures. They're multi-story, uniform in design, built in matching architectural style. The directory lists 18 operational facilities in that district. 45 buildings have no corresponding entry. In St. Louis, 1885, the gap is even wider. The insurance survey shows 94 large-scale buildings in the industrial quarter south of the river. The directory accounts for 22. 72 structures are mapped, measured, insured, but not officially listed as occupied or operational. This isn't isolated to one city or one year. It's a recurring feature of the archive. The buildings that appear only on insurance maps often share another trait. They're designed for capacity that exceeds documented demand. Warehouses built to store goods for populations the census doesn't reflect. Institutional buildings with room counts that suggest residential or administrative use at scales the directories don't support. In Albany, New York, insurance maps from 1878 show a complex of connected buildings near the Hudson River docks. The footprint suggests coordinated construction. Same materials. Same roof angles. Same spacing between windows. The layout implies centralized planning. Yet the city directory from 1878 lists only 3 businesses operating in that zone. The structures themselves number 19. The timing raises questions. These maps weren't created retroactively. They were drawn by surveyors walking the streets in real time. The directories were compiled the same way. Door-to-door canvassing, name collection, address verification. Both processes were labor-intensive. Both claimed accuracy. And yet they produce records that seem to describe 2 different cities occupying the same geographic space. What makes this particularly unsettling is the consistency of omission. It's not random. The buildings that appear only on insurance maps tend to cluster in specific districts, near waterfronts, near rail hubs, near canal junctions, places designed for the movement of goods and people at scale. And the structures themselves suggest preparation for demand that hadn't yet materialized, or that the directories chose not to document. In Cleveland, 1883, the Sanborn map shows a grid of storage buildings extending 3 blocks inland from Lake Erie. 42 structures in total, each one built to identical specifications. The city directory lists 11. The missing 31 buildings were substantial enough to insure, but not substantial enough, or not active enough, to appear in the city's official commercial record. The insurance companies had no reason to fabricate buildings. Their business model depended on accurate risk assessment. Overestimating the number of insurable structures would expose them to financial loss. Underestimating would mean lost revenue. They had every incentive to map reality as precisely as possible. The directories had their own incentives. Completeness increased value. Residents and businesses used directories to navigate the city, locate services, verify addresses. An incomplete directory was a failed product. Publishers competed on accuracy. And yet, the records don't align. By the mid-1880s, this pattern had appeared in every major city along the eastern seaboard and the Great Lakes corridor. Philadelphia, Boston, New York, Baltimore, Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Detroit, Chicago, St. Louis, Cincinnati. The same discrepancy. The same types of buildings missing from directories but present on insurance maps. The same institutional scale. The same architectural uniformity. It's as if 2 parallel record-keeping systems were documenting 2 separate realities existing in the same urban space at the same moment in time. The question isn't whether the buildings existed. The insurance maps prove they did. The question is why the people compiling city directories, walking the same streets, knocking on the same doors, didn't include them. The pattern extends beyond individual cities. When you map the discrepancies across the eastern United States and compare them to similar records in the United Kingdom, something else emerges. The same gap appears in British insurance surveys and rate books from the 1870s and 1880s. In Manchester, the Charles E. Goad Company produced fire insurance maps between 1885 and 1889. These maps documented the industrial districts with the same precision Sanborn used in America. Building footprints, construction materials, wall thickness, roof type, every detail necessary for risk assessment. The rate books, Britain's equivalent to city directories, told a different story. Goad's 1886 map of Manchester's Ancoats district shows 78 large-scale textile mills and warehouses. The rate book from that year lists 31 operational mills in the same area. 47 buildings are mapped, measured, and insured, but absent from official municipal records. In Liverpool, the gap is nearly identical in proportion. Insurance maps from 1887 document 112 warehouses along the Albert Dock and surrounding streets. The rate books account for 43. In Birmingham's Industrial Quarter, 1889, insurance surveyors mapped 69 factory buildings. Rate books list 27. The numbers follow the same pattern. The missing structures follow the same profile. Multi-story. Standardized construction. Built near transportation infrastructure. Designed for capacity beyond what the official records suggest was needed. This isn't coincidence. This is systemic. What makes the transatlantic parallel particularly striking is the timing. The American discrepancies peak between 1870 and 1890. The British discrepancies peak in the same window. 2 countries, different surveying companies, different municipal systems. Same 20-year span. Same type of omission. The structures that appear only on insurance maps weren't temporary. They weren't wooden shacks or informal construction. They were permanent installations built with fire-resistant materials. In both countries, insurance companies classified them as high-value properties. That classification meant they were substantial, durable, and expensive to replace. And yet, municipal authorities on both sides of the Atlantic chose not to include them in official listings. The Erie Canal offers another angle. When the canal opened in 1825, it connected the Great Lakes to the Atlantic Ocean via the Hudson River. It was an engineering achievement that transformed regional trade. But the infrastructure built along the canal in the decades that followed raises its own questions. By 1850, storage facilities lined the canal route at intervals that suggest coordinated planning. Warehouses in Buffalo, grain elevators in Rochester, distribution hubs in Syracuse, Utica, Rome. Each one built to handle cargo volumes far exceeding the documented traffic of that period. The canal's official traffic records show moderate use in the 1850s. Freight tonnage gradually increased through the 1860s and 1870s. But the storage capacity built during those years was already scaled for peak traffic levels that wouldn't be reached until the 1880s, if the records are accurate. Insurance maps from the 1860s show these facilities in place, fully constructed. Multi-building complexes with standardized architecture. City directories from the same years either omit them entirely or list only a fraction of the structures shown on the maps. The mismatch between capacity and documented demand appears again. Railroad construction follows a similar pattern. Between 1850 and 1890, American railroads expanded at extraordinary speed. Thousands of miles of track laid across the continent. Stations, freight depots, maintenance yards, and switching stations built in cities large and small. But the infrastructure often preceded the traffic. In Erie, Pennsylvania, the railroad depot complex mapped by Sanborn in 1874 includes 9 separate buildings. Large-scale construction. Uniform design. Built to serve a transportation network far more developed than census and shipping records suggest existed at that time. The city directory lists the depot as a single operational facility. The insurance map shows 9 distinct structures. In Toledo, Ohio, the railroad district mapped in 1876 includes 17 buildings clustered around the switching yard. The directory lists 4. In Dayton, 1881, insurance maps document 12 buildings in the railroad quarter. The directory accounts for 5. The pattern holds across dozens of cities. Infrastructure built before the demand is documented. Structures insured but not officially recorded. Capacity scaled for populations and freight volumes that don't appear in contemporary municipal records. Then there are the water systems. Victorian-era cities across the United States and Britain built water supply and distribution networks during the same period these discrepancies appear. Reservoirs, pumping stations, filtration plants, underground piping, massive public works projects requiring years of planning and construction. The scale of these systems is often difficult to reconcile with the populations listed in census records. Philadelphia's Fairmount Water Works, expanded in the 1870s, included pumping capacity designed to serve a population of 1.2 million. The 1870 census recorded Philadelphia's population at 674,000. The system was built to handle nearly double the documented demand. Boston's Cochituate water system, upgraded between 1875 and 1885, was engineered for a population exceeding 1 million. The 1880 census listed Boston's population at 362,000. In Britain, the pattern repeats. Manchester's Thirlmere Aqueduct, completed in 1894, was designed to supply water for a population of 1.5 million. Manchester's population in 1891 was recorded at 505,000. These weren't incremental upgrades. These were full-capacity systems built for populations 3 times larger than official records indicated lived in those cities at the time of construction. City planners and engineers left extensive documentation justifying these projects. The language in planning reports consistently references future growth and anticipated expansion. But the timelines don't align. The infrastructure was ready decades before the populations reached the capacity the systems were designed to serve. Insurance maps document the physical plants, pumping stations, filtration buildings, reservoir complexes. These structures appear on Sanborn and Goad maps with the same precision as warehouses and mills. And in many cases, they too are absent from city directories or listed with fewer buildings than the insurance surveys show. The administrative systems that appeared during this period add another layer. Between 1860 and 1890, municipal governments across the United States and Britain adopted nearly identical administrative structures. Standardized record-keeping, uniform tax codes, centralized building inspection, public health bureaus, fire departments organized along the same hierarchical lines. The systems didn't evolve gradually. They appeared suddenly, often within a 5-year window across multiple cities. In the United States, major cities adopted civil service reforms between 1883 and 1888. Professional city managers, bureaucratic departments organized by function, standardized forms and filing systems. The same organizational model appeared in New York, Philadelphia, Boston, Chicago, and St. Louis within years of each other. In Britain, municipal corporations reorganized along similar lines between 1882 and 1889. London, Manchester, Liverpool, Birmingham, Glasgow, each adopted administrative frameworks that looked nearly identical despite being implemented by separate local governments. The uniformity suggests either coordination or inheritance. Either cities were deliberately copying a shared model, or they were adapting structures that already existed in some form. The buildings that appear only on insurance maps often house these new administrative functions. Tax offices, inspection bureaus, public health agencies, record storage. The directories sometimes list the agencies by name but not the buildings they occupied. The insurance maps show the buildings but not their official designation. Whether this reflects inheritance or convergence, the result is the same: physical infrastructure and administrative systems appearing at scales that seem mismatched to the documented populations they were meant to serve. By 1890, the discrepancy had stabilized. Insurance maps and city directories began to align more closely. The missing buildings started appearing in official records. The gap narrowed, but the structures themselves remained. The ones built in the 1860s, 1870s, and 1880s, still standing, still in use, still unexplained by the records from the years they were constructed. The term Tartaria appears on European maps from the 16th through 19th centuries. It referred to the vast region of Central Asia stretching from the Caspian Sea to Siberia and Mongolia. The name derives from Tatar, the Turkic and Mongol peoples who inhabited these territories. It was a geographic label, not a political state. By the mid-1800s, the term had largely disappeared from Western cartography as more precise regional names replaced it. In recent years, some researchers have repurposed the term. They use Tartaria not as a reference to Central Asia, but as shorthand for a different interpretation of 19th-century urban development. The label has become a lens through which people examine the patterns described in this documentary: the buildings on insurance maps but not in directories, the infrastructure built before documented demand, the administrative systems appearing simultaneously across continents. 3 interpretations have emerged. The first holds that these patterns reflect standard industrial-era planning. Cities anticipated growth. Investors built speculatively. Governments over-engineered infrastructure to avoid future bottlenecks. The gaps in directories resulted from administrative inconsistency, not structural absence. This view sees the evidence as unremarkable, expected inefficiencies in rapidly modernizing societies. The second interpretation suggests the infrastructure represents inherited systems, that the buildings, water networks, and administrative frameworks were adapted from earlier organizational models that left minimal documentary trace. This view doesn't claim conspiracy. It simply observes that the uniformity and scale suggest precedent rather than innovation. The third model questions the population figures themselves. It asks whether census records accurately captured urban populations during this period, or whether transient workers, uncounted immigrants, and unofficial residents created demand the directories never reflected. This interpretation sees the infrastructure as appropriate for actual use, but mismatched to official documentation. All 3 interpretations can accommodate the same evidence: the insurance maps, the directories, the canal warehouses, the railroad depots, the water systems, the administrative uniformity, the transatlantic timing. None can be proven from the archive alone. The year 1816 returns to focus. That year, known as the year without a summer, saw global climate disruption following the eruption of Mount Tambora. Crop failures, migration, social reorganization. Some suggest this period triggered large-scale infrastructure planning that materialized decades later in the cities we've examined. The connection is speculative, but the timing aligns with the earliest discrepancies between insurance maps and city records. Tartaria, in this context, functions as metaphor. It represents a framework for questioning accepted narratives about 19th century development. It's not a claim about a lost empire. It's a label for the unease that emerges when official records don't align with physical evidence. The buildings existed. The insurance companies mapped them. The directories omitted them. Whether that omission reflects bureaucratic failure, deliberate exclusion, or something else entirely remains unresolved. The evidence invites examination. The patterns invite questions. The answers remain open.